Back with another video, my viewers and my subscribers. Yes, man. Another one is still in Mr. Mark holding the opposition leader, man, them at the House of the Senate, Matter about the budget debate. Yeah, man. So I just want to just check out that one here and let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Alright? Bless up on yourself.
This Honourable House now resumes its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mrs. Holness, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Miss Grange, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malawu Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Terry Long, Miss Smith, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Main, Mr. Davis, Mr. Witter, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown, Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Miss Crawford, Miss Daly, Miss Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Golding, Tamika Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Miss Hamilton, Miss Hannah, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Miss Lee, Dr. Brown Burke, Mr. Miller, Mr. Montague, Miss Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Siblist, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Wright.
This afternoon, I want to use this opportunity to welcome all our visitors with us this afternoon in the gallery. And I also want to welcome the visitors joining us in the Well of Parliament this afternoon. Well, if they were not members of Parliament, they would not be sitting in the gallery there. Oh, very well. So I welcome you all, and I also want to welcome the many persons who are joining us online by the various social media platforms this afternoon. And also, last but certainly not least, I would want to say the most, all of us as members of Parliament here this afternoon. I welcome you to the sitting of the House this afternoon. Statements by ministers.
Madam Speaker, in the traditional sense of the conduct of this financial debate, statements by ministers are usually not included. So I invite you to proceed with the agenda as stated, when the substantial matter to be dealt with today will, of course, be the continuation of the debate on the financial budget. The Speaker I will introduce at the appropriate time for your guidance, Madam Speaker. May it please you.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Annual Report for Spectrum Management Authority for the financial year 2021-2022. Annual Report for eGov Jamaica Limited for the financial year 2021-2022. And Annual Reports on Audited Financial Statements for the Electoral Commission of Jamaica for the financial year 2021-2022. The following is a message from the President of the Senate. To the Honorable House of Representatives, I have the honor to advise the Honorable House of Representatives that on the 24th day of February 2023, a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Registration and Regulation of Companies that Operate and Maintain Segregated Accounts and Incorporated Segregated Accounts and for Connected Matters was passed in the Honorable Senate. Signed, Thomas Tavares Finson, OJ CDKC JP, President of the Senate.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I signify here his willingness to take charge of the bill.
A bill shortly entitled the Segregated Accounts Companies Act 2023 read a first time.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move for the second reading of the bill.
Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to sittings of the House, motions for leave to introduce bills, presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained, public business.
Madam Speaker, as indicated at the offset, the single matter for public business is a continuation of the debate on the appropriations bill. The Speaker today will be the Leader of the Opposition and Member of Parliament for St. Andrews Southern, Mr. Mark Golding.
Madam Speaker, I rise today grateful for the opportunity afforded by my constituents, the good people of South St. Andrew, to stand before you. I hail them all, some of whom have taken the time to be with us here today, including our councillors, our councillor candidates, and the members of our constituency executive. To my wife, who's my soulmate, my partner, my dearest friend, and the foundation of my support system, Sandra, I thank you. And I thank our children for their understanding and patience as I move forward daily to fulfill the charge of leadership that I've been given in taking the People's National Party forward, onward, and upward. my fellow elected representatives in this House, on both sides of this aisle, and those who sit in the upper house of this Parliament. Thank you all for what you bring to this Parliament to make it the unique place that it is. Even if we get a little heated sometimes, at other times we work together, and that is when we're at our best. In particular, I want to extend a hand of fellowship to acknowledge my colleagues on this side who have stood with me as we work to fulfill our party's vision of social justice, equality of access to opportunity, and the rights and freedoms of all Jamaican people. These are the core values which our party holds dear to its very heart. I should also say a special word of thanks to the staff of this Parliament who, week in, week out, work hard and with expertise to ensure that the Parliament runs smoothly. I must hail to the team at the office of the Leader of the Opposition, the team at our headquarters, and all members of the party, and indeed all Jamaicans. In our heart of hearts, most of us want nothing more than to see our island home grow, develop, and flourish with our families and our friends in tow. We as Jamaicans yearn for a productive island home and to live our best lives as content and happy people. Now, perhaps more than ever, Madam Speaker, as we meet well into the 60th year of Jamaica's political independence, as citizens of this remarkable nation, blessed with a world-renowned spirit of creativity and resilience, we are forced to evaluate the route in which our people are being taken in the name of nation building. It provides an appropriate juncture for us to consider once again, how do we achieve the state of national contentment and security that our people seek and deserve? How do we make Jamaica a place where all our people can thrive and achieve progress in their lives to build their own individual versions of the Jamaican dream? Madam Speaker, over 40 years have passed in which we have accepted the view that the role of the state is merely to facilitate the private sector as the engine of growth, who will then lead growth, and growth will trickle down to the people. I suspect that most Jamaicans no longer accept that theory of development. We have to look around us and assess what is happening in our nation. We have to ask, what does the state of the nation have to do with the government that we have? Who is the government serving? Is it serving the broad base of the people? With this current government, in our view, the people's lives are not being treated as a priority. In particular, they're not doing what the most Honourable Portia Simpson Miller used to call balancing the books while balancing people's lives. I speak today from the premise that the role of government is to facilitate the people, all types of people, and facilitate their potential for growth. When we look at the state of the nation and listen to the daily frustrations of the people, it is clear that the government is out of step with the people. They are still practicing trickle-down economics when the world is moving on. If people cannot feel the reform and the recovery that the finance minister has been celebrating, it simply means that we are not focused on the right things. Madam Speaker, the time has come to move our country in a new direction. We have closely scrutinized the budget projections presented by the Andrew Holness administration for the fiscal year to come, 2023-2024. The budget tells you the priorities of the government, and I can see the serious change that is needed. We need to see the nation move to fair labor practices, improving broad access to the resources of the nation, to opportunity, to sustainable and good living. The government is not prioritizing the change that we need to see. It is not a budget for the people. It reflects the character and interests of those who this government primarily serves. Here are two examples, Madam Speaker. Why wouldn't the government find a way to extend the period for the public sector salary negotiations to continue to fruition and to allow the groups to make their measured, well-informed and transparent decisions on the government's wage offer, instead of being bullied and cajoled by take it or lose it? Why? And why is there no budget for the overdue, constitutionally required local government elections? Why? This annual budget is a serious exercise. It has made me reflect on the role of leadership. Standing before you as leader of the opposition and president of the People's National Party is truly an awesome responsibility. I know that there are many relying on my voice to stand in the defense of the people and the democracy we believe in. The conditions of life that Jamaicans are suffering through today are very challenging and are intensifying. To face them requires leadership with the people's interests at heart. It requires leadership of good character to create a nation where we live good with each other. I will stand in defense of every Jamaican who is now languishing on a hospital bench or chair when they should be resting in a hospital bed. Every Jamaican who has to be making hard choices every morning between having breakfast or giving your children lunch money to go to school. Every student who is second-guessing the path they have chosen because they aren't confident that when they complete their education, they'll be able to find a meaningful job and to make a good quality of life for themselves. This budget should speak to those realities that are faced by real people with real lives, real families, and real hopes and dreams. The budget should be about building the Jamaican dream. But it is not about that at all. It is about more of the same when people want a new direction. So, Madam Speaker, where are we coming from? Last year, the Andrew Holness government came to the people with a budget that they said was meant to respond to the social and economic challenges left in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. They acknowledged the rising global interest rate environment and the supply chain disruptions due to the war between Russia and Ukraine being fought on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Food costs were rising. Energy costs were increasing dramatically. The government tabled a budget of $912 billion a year ago. We on this side looked at the projections and knew that with the spike of inflation and the sharp increases in the cost of living, especially food, transport, and electricity costs, the provisions for social support in the budget were inadequate. The weakened Jamaican economy coming out of the pandemic had not yet recovered the lost ground from the severe dislocation of COVID. Prices of basic necessities, food, electricity, transportation, medication, were rising above and beyond people's incomes, which were not moving, and have continued to rise week in, week out. With all that was happening in the world, and with the conditions that were being experienced by our people here in Jamaica, it was clear that the budget would not see the nation through what was going to be one of our most difficult years in modern history. As basic conditions of life worsened for most Jamaicans, with struggling to survive we put our heads down, spent some time, and put in the work to double-check the numbers. And Madam Speaker, I stood right here in this very space and told the people that we would take another $40 billion, or about 2% of GDP, to get the people of Jamaica through this period without the society unraveling. I asked them, I begged them, implored them to make the appropriate adjustments to the budget. I said further that support of $40 billion for vulnerable Jamaicans would be needed to cushion the crisis. It could be financed by slowing the pace of debt reduction for that fiscal year. The usual voices jumped out. The budget crafters put their greatest strategic asset, their media apologists, into action. And the result? Gaslighting and pure chat. They spun and they spun. Called us every name in the book. They even tried to make us out as fiscally irresponsible when we're the ones who set the country on the right fiscal path to begin with. They rubbished our warnings, instead saying that if another $40 billion is added to the budget, the sky would fall in and the country would mash up. Well, we ignored the noise and watched the sale, continuing to advocate for more social support to cushion the crisis on the people. Well, Madam Speaker, last month, the Finance Minister, as is customary, tabled and presented the budget for this coming fiscal year. Then, for the first time ever, I think, in this country's history, he came back to the House after tabling the budget for the coming year to present a new set of supplementary estimates for the previous budget. So after he tabled the next budget, he was still adjusting the last one. History was indeed made in this House then. Even more than that, Madam Speaker, the supplementary estimates brought suddenly to this House by the government between tabling of the new budget and the budget debate for that one was a fourth supplementary budget in one fiscal year. That sounds to me like fiscal confusion. 4 supplementary budgets. Yes, Madam Speaker, so here we are, 4 supplementary estimates later. Having started with an estimate of $912 billion for the 2022-23 fiscal year, the government ended the fiscal year with a spend of $1.02 trillion. 1.02 trillion was the final budget for the year 22-23, the fiscal year now ending. So last year's budget was actually the first $1 trillion budget in the history of Jamaica. Not this year. Not this year. Anyway, do you know what that means, Madam Speaker? It means that amidst all the bluster and the lies last year, much more could have been done and much earlier to ease the suffering of the Jamaican people. Choices were indeed made, but they failed to cushion the crisis. All know Santa Claus no come to the ghetto. All know. But instead of using $40 billion out of the $95 billion in additional taxes that have been collected this year, instead of using that $40 billion to cushion the crisis as we propose, the government has gone about frustrating and upsetting the Jamaican people. The public sector workers are frustrated and upset that they're being pressured and bullied by the government to agree to the terms of this public sector pay restructuring exercise, which many of them don't understand, where certain uncertainties abound and where for many it seems that they'll be worse off after all the additional tax is taken out of their pay. We even have a fireman on the top of the transport center in Halfway Tree protesting. We say, don't tell our police and other dedicated public servants, take it or lose it. That is disrespectful fear-mongering. The people of Western Jamaica are upset and frustrated by the debacle at Cornwall Regional Hospital. It has become the mother of all overruns of cost and all delays. The overall restoration project was originally costed at $2 billion. It now stands at $14.1 billion and counting. And the facility has been unable to function normally for 6 years with no end in sight. What is happening to taxpayers' money? Surely the West deserves the best. Madam Speaker, there has been no accountability for this monumental incompetence from the government inflicted on the people of Western Jamaica. I move to the east. The people of St. Thomas and Portland are frustrated and upset with the negligent and uncaring way in which the South Coast Highway project has been implemented, leaving them to live in the terrible dust with respiratory ailments and other conditions, and to have to traverse miles and miles of terrible dug-up roads every day for 2 years and counting. Our brothers and sisters in the East are begging for a new direction. The high levels of fines under the new Road Traffic Act seems like the government is trying to extract more revenues out of an already struggling population. Doesn't the government know that pressure busts pipe? The amnesty for tickets and demerit points left many people feeling like the system is a fraud. And a month later, the responsible minister still hasn't fulfilled his promise to fix the child seat issue after the Jamaica Labour Party MPs voted down the bill that I prepared and brought here in less than a week to fix that problem. The whole transportation system needs a brand new direction. Madam Speaker, the investors in our emerging medicinal cannabis industry are frustrated and upset that the government is licensing the import of large quantities of surplus ganja from Canada to be imported and dumped on the local market. The brethren across the country want to be part of a new direction for the ganja industry. And why shouldn't they, the originators of it, who took the blame and bore the oppression, why shouldn't they be able to profit from the gains of that industry? Madam Speaker, many Jamaicans are frustrated and upset by the way this government treats vulnerable Jamaicans when it comes to land and housing, demolishing the homes of single mothers and running them off public land without making any provision to provide them with alternative shelter for them and their children. The disgrace of Clifton will live in infamy in this country. Many Jamaicans are ashamed and frustrated and upset about the SSL scandal, where our national icon, Usain Bolt, was robbed of his retirement savings, while others were able to close their accounts before you know what hit the fan. The whole process was obscure. A new direction is needed, which must include transparency and equity. Many Jamaicans who believe in the democratic system of local government that is now enshrined in our Constitution since 2015 are frustrated and upset by the government once again using its majority in Parliament to subvert democracy by pushing through last-minute legislation to again put back the local government elections, now 3 years overdue, on totally spurious grounds, because they are afraid to face the people. And what is worse, the government's fiscal policy paper says that, and what is worse, Madam Speaker, the government's fiscal policy paper says it is collecting $766 billion of taxes from the people for this coming fiscal year. $766 billion in taxes. That is $150 billion, or more than 24% than the $616 billion it collected in the prior year, 2022. $150 billion, over 24% more taxes are being collected this fiscal year than in the prior fiscal year. It is also $95 billion more than the $671 billion in taxes that was originally budgeted for this year. $95 billion more than they originally budgeted to collect. $95 billion in surplus taxes from the people this year over what was originally budgeted. It is worth noting that the government projects that it will collect $824 billion in taxes in the coming fiscal year. That is an increase in tax collections of over 34% over 2 fiscal years, from April 2022 to March 2024. 34% increase in taxes being collected in just 2 years. 34%. An increase of taxes of $208 billion from the people of Jamaica. Madam Speaker, the massive increase in the amount of taxes collected from the people over the last 2 years brings to light just how hollow is the refrain, no new taxes, that has been bellowed in this House to the predictable but fundamentally empty beating of tables last week Tuesday. The 34%, $208 billion increase in taxes over the past 2 fiscal years is significantly greater, nearly triple the accumulated inflation over the 2-year period, which is projected to be 12.3%, 7.1% in 22-23, and 5.2% in 23-24, totaling 12.3%. So we have 34% increase in taxes. Inflation is just 12.3% over that period. It comes as well in a period where people's standard of living is being ravaged by the cost of living increases. So the cost of living are bite the people, and the taxes are suck out them blood. I know, when I thought about it, all I could think about was Lone Ranger with him song Barnabas Collins. Yeah. Suck out the blood of the people. Madam Speaker, these massive increases in taxes weren't limited to the last 2 years either. Madam Speaker, these massive increases in taxes weren't limited to the last 2 years either. If we look at the last 7 fiscal years, the tax take has increased from 24.4% of GDP, 24.4% of GDP, to 28.2% of GDP, placing Jamaica amongst the highest taxed countries in the world. And I have a graph that shows it, which when the speech copies are distributed to you, you can have a look on page 12 and 13. And if we want to think about it another way, to look at it from the perspective of an individual, then over the last 7 years of the Jamaica Labour Party administration, the tax take from every Jamaican, 15 years and older, has increased from 197,000 to 365,000, an increase of 85% over that period. This JLP administration is now extracting 168,000 more from the pockets of every Jamaican than when they first came to office. So, and when they come here with the Samfi statement about no new taxes, you know what the real story is, Madam Speaker. And you know, Madam Speaker, since... Let's go and listen. Let's go.
Hold on. I just want to hold a minute. I just want to declare that I have been watching. And apart from the member to the speaker's right, left and right behind him, every other member on that side has been disturbing your speech. No. I have been watching, and I said every other member.
The disturbance which I'm aware of is coming from the other side.
Well, I'm not surprised. Why am I not?
Madam Speaker, since the vast majority of taxes in Jamaica are now indirect taxes, the poor and lower income earners bear the brunt of it in the GCT on local purchases, which is projected to increase by 31% to 156 billion in the coming year over what it was originally budgeted for this fiscal year. And the taxes paid on importation into Jamaica of the basic necessities of life. One aspect of this, which was particularly aggravating this year, was the ad valorem special consumption tax on gasoline, which was based on an average projected world oil price of $67.50 US for the year. The ad valorem gas tax is a percentage of the price of gas and other petroleum products on which it's charged, so that the higher the oil price on the world market and the cost of oil to Jamaica, the higher the amount of tax that is charged on each litre of gas or other petroleum products. In last year's budget debate, when it was already apparent that the oil price would be much higher than $67.50, which had been budgeted, I called on the government to give motorists, transport operators, and electricity consumers a break on the ad valorem gas tax. The mechanism that I proposed was to cap the tax at the budgeted oil price of $67.50 US a barrel, so that the people would not suffer any additional tax if and when the oil price went over $67.50. And the fiscal targets would not be affected. Madam Speaker, I even went as far as to personally draft an order under the Provisional Collection of Tax Act, capping the gas tax on that basis. And I personally went to the Ministry of Finance to deliver the draft order to the minister. He wasn't there at the time, apparently. Well, I have never received a reply to the letter enclosing that draft order, and I have never heard a word from the minister on the gas tax cap. As it turned out, the average oil price over this fiscal year has been over $90 US, way above the $67.50 that was budgeted, and the government has benefited from billions of dollars of gas tax by refusing to cap the tax at the budgeted price of $67 US and 50 cents. The SCT on imports for the first 9 months of the year was $7.8 billion, or 18% above budget, which accords with my own projection as to how much the people would have saved if the cap had been put in place. Anyway, since you didn't listen to me last time, and it has bitten everyone in their algorithms, please, for the sake of the Jamaican people, listen this time. Time come for a new direction. We saw what you did when you said no new taxes. We know that it means much more taxes. It's just like telling us that the number of serious crimes is going down while we all watch in terror, the dastardly nature of crimes gets worse and worse. One of the things Jamaicans resent most is being taken for a fool. You think me a idiot?
That's right.
The member's time for speaking has expired.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the member's time be extended sufficiently to allow him to complete his presentation.
The question before the House is that the member's time be extended sufficiently to allow him to complete his presentation. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and colleagues. One of the things Jamaicans resent most is being taken for a fool. You think me an idiot? Is a core question that this country has been asking the Andrew Holness government in recent times. The disregard for our people heightens their anger and frustration. Disregard. Another example is the manner in which the new Road Traffic Act was rolled out. The police who enforce the new act have shared with us the total amount of traffic fines imposed and collected under the new law. And it has sent a signal to the population that the much higher traffic fines are less about road safety and more about collecting revenue, which is a wrong signal to be sent. And while I'm on this topic, where is the amendment to the regulations that we were promised on the 7th of February in this House, and we were told to get it that week? Where is it? Minister promised us that day when they blocked my bill that it would be ready that same week. We're still waiting. More than a month has passed, and we haven't seen or heard about those regulations. In the meantime, taxi operators have to operate with uncertainty as to their legal exposure in transporting children. Shame. The Jamaican people need a new direction. How is the government deploying the massive amount of additional taxes that it's taking from the people? Instead of strengthening the safety net, which God knows needs to be strengthened with so much taxes coming out of the pockets of the people. Instead of strengthening the safety net and investing heavily in the developmental needs of the people, the government is intent on reducing the public debt at an even faster rate than is required by the fiscal rules. They are projecting to bring the public debt to below 60% of GDP by March 2027, which is a year earlier than the target in the fiscal rules. And that additional tax up front to get to that target a year earlier is a huge burden on the economy and the people of this country. It sounds good, but is it wise? Is it prudent? Why accelerate and bring forward the repayment of the debt when the society is under so much pressure? People are losing hope for the future. The social fabric is unraveling rapidly with an ongoing daily diet of depraved murders and domestic violence. I should mention here, Madam Speaker, that the recovery from the economic shock of the pandemic was not growth in a meaningful sense. The nation's productive capacity has not grown since the pandemic struck in 2020. What has happened is that as social distancing ended and tourists returned to our island and business returned to normal, once again we have been utilizing the existing productive capacity that existed when the pandemic started. We have essentially recovered to ground zero from the hole that we were in. And that hole was 11% of GDP. Our rate of recovery has been good, but in comparative terms, it's really nothing to crow about. In 2022, for example, Barbados, St. Lucia, and the Bahamas, each of those which have progressive governments in charge, recovered their GDP at faster rates than Jamaica. They grew at 10.5%, 9.1%, and 8% respectively in 2022 versus Jamaica's 5.1%. So I don't think we should be treating our recovery as something extra special. It really is not. The better and more sustainable strategy that we need to employ is to invest heavily in our people now. Now. Through better education and training, better health care, land and housing for those who are excluded under the current system. Investing in our people is the only way that our national productivity will increase. Our economy can grow rapidly and in an inclusive way. Our people can generate significant wealth for themselves, and the raging crime monster can be tamed, even as we steadily reduce the public debt to the targeted level of 60% of GDP. Jamaica cannot afford to continue as we are going now. People are fed up. Those who can migrate are doing so, whether it is nurses and teachers who have been leaving at alarming rates, or others who have become asylum seekers crossing the Mexico-US border. Police and soldiers we hear fighting in the streets. Bandits breaking into ATM machines. The corner shop and the community bar are no longer safe places to hold our vibes. Not even the armed guards in an armored courier service are safe in today's Jamaica. Society is unraveling under this government. Disorder is the new order. Government badness run with good governance. There is despair instead of repair.
That's right.
Aggression and violence instead of love and care. Time come for a change. A change in the way we do things and a change in our priorities. What is in effect now is not working. Jamaica must address the deep challenges that have to be confronted and overcome if we are to achieve the full potential of greatness. That is the Jamaican dream. Time comes for a new direction, and that new direction that we will take the country on must address the concerns about two specific weight-bearing structures: taxation and recovery and growth. Madam Speaker, I want to look first at the painfully slow rate of growth of the Jamaican economy over the last 7 years. When this government took over in 2016, the debt to GDP was down to approximately 115%, and there was a fiscal surplus of 0.6% of GDP. The current account deficit was only 2% of GDP. Inflation was 3.7%. Unemployment was below 10%. Given the history of our economy, what all that means is that they got a good wicket to bat on. Certainly good enough to give them the confidence to say that they could achieve 5% annual growth of the economy by the end of 4 years. That 5 in 4 promise, of course, turned into a pipe dream. Meaningful GDP growth has proved elusive. The average rate of real GDP growth for the 4 fiscal years from 2016-17 through to 19-20 was negligible, just 1% per annum. And in fact, in the 4th year of the 5 in 4 period, there was negative growth of 0.1% for the calendar year. That 4-year period of very low growth performance was before the pandemic hit, which collapsed GDP due to that shock by 11%. And that is from where we have now recovered, we are told, by the Minister of Finance to where we were before COVID hit. When the Finance Minister speaks of rapid growth, he's really speaking about the rate of recovery of the economy, as I've said, climbing out of the hole. And I would argue that the dramatic slump in mid-2020 was very different to the deep and prolonged structural challenges that have caused GDP collapses in the past. He has been comparing the recovery and saying how much better we've done this time than in the past. And it's true that the recovery has been quick worldwide. But the truth is that the nature of this pandemic, it was a disease that caused a cessation of activity, a severe cessation of activity. The disease having been conquered, activity has returned. Very different to past structural challenges which undermine GDP through various shocks, whether it be weather shocks or oil price, prolonged oil price shocks, and so on. Madam Speaker, we are going in the wrong direction, and about 54% of Jamaicans have said so. And this can only mean one thing: time come for a new direction. Having recovered, Madam Speaker, back to the 2019 levels of economic output, Jamaica once again faces the challenge now, going forward, of achieving meaningful levels of economic growth. The outlook is not pretty. The government's economic strategy is failing to generate meaningful growth. Despite all the reforms and sacrifices to improve the fiscal management of the country over the past 10 years, the government's own fiscal policy paper, which was tabled with the budget for this coming year, projects an annual average growth rate of a mere 1.175% per year for the next 4 years, even after recovering from the pandemic. 1.175% average annual growth over 4 years. That's what. In fact, it shows growth slowing down over the next 4 years, from 1.6% in the coming year to just 1% in the last 2 years of the next 4-year period, ending in March 2027. This slow rate of growth will impair the ability to make much-needed investments in our people, to make the nation's human capital more productive, so that higher rates of economic growth can be achieved. It is because we have taken the wrong direction that it's like a catch-22 situation. Low growth means less money for investment in uplifting our people, but unless we invest in uplifting our people, we will never achieve meaningful and sustained levels of economic growth, which I would say means anything from 3 to 5% and up. As the Shadow Minister of Finance eruditely illustrated last Thursday, Jamaica needs to escape from the low-wage, low-tech model of development that this government is pursuing, the inevitable outcomes of which are low productivity and low economic growth. Repressed wages lead to repressive government. Even if they deny it, it is manifest for all to see in the social unraveling around us. A major difference between the PNP and JLP strategies is that we prioritize investment in human capital through education, training, and programs to get youth at risk back on track, while this government is prioritizing building a brand new parliament for us politicians to make speeches in. Meanwhile, expenditure on education, or I should say on the delivery of instruction, i.e. teaching, at pre-primary, primary, and secondary schools has declined in real terms over the past 6 years. The $73.7 billion tabled in the budget for the upcoming fiscal year for delivery of instruction, i.e. teaching, is equivalent in real terms to just $50.4 billion in 2016-17 due to the 46% accumulated inflation since then. And that is actually less than the $51.2 billion that was spent on delivery of instruction in 2016-17. It has declined by 1.6% in real terms over the period. This is a shock when you think that fiscal space has expanded so dramatically that the real expenditure on delivery of instruction and teaching has actually declined. The decline primarily reflects the reduction on delivery of instruction, i.e. teaching at the primary education level, which is 9.4% decline in real terms over that period. So while the information minister has been complaining about dunceness in dancehall music, his government has been reducing the investment required in education at primary schools. And this government has yet to outline any effective measures to address the 2 years of serious learning loss because of COVID and the school lockdown for that 2-year period. Madam Speaker, the government clearly does not value education. To move Jamaica forward, we need to change priorities and put the people first. Invest in the Jamaican people to build Jamaica. Madam Speaker, the Finance Minister had an interesting section of his presentation last Tuesday in which he waxed eloquently on the Right Excellent Marcus Garvey. Much of what he said on Garvey I agree with. Building and reinforcing self-belief, self-confidence, and self-love in our people is essential to national development. Given our brutal past of slavery and colonialism, which has done so much long-term damage, Marcus Garvey is a national treasure whose message to the world is a powerful tool for achieving personal and national greatness in a country where the vast majority of us are of African descent. However, where Nigel and I part company is on how to give expression to the power of Marcus's greatness. Putting his face on a $100 bill, as much as we support it, really won't move the needle. In fact, I have to ask, how can the government really dare to use the image and name of Marcus when we see them mashing down people's homes, dashing the hopes and dreams of a poor young woman who says she holds receipts for payment for the land, locking up thousands and thousands of youths who have never been charged under states of emergency, sitting back while state agents cut off the locks of a young girl, a young woman held in police lockups to shame and tame her, and nothing done to commit the wrongs against her. So many premature newborns have died in public hospitals due to a failure to maintain basic hygiene standards, and until this day, there's been no accountability to the grieving parents by those with whom the buck stops. And they disbanded the Rastafari Advisory Council, which was established under our watch, and exclude Rasta from the lawful ganja economy, which should be empowering that community, and even refuse to meet with their compound Maroons to have respectful dialogue about their historical status and their land. When we speak of Marcus Garvey, Madam Speaker, it reinforces that a new direction is needed. Marcus said, and I quote, "It is by education that we become prepared for our duties and responsibilities in life." If one is badly educated, he must naturally fail in the proper assumption and practice of his duties and responsibilities, end quote. Marcus Garvey would frown on the disrespectful way this government has been treating our teachers. We must be ready to truly harness the empowering greatness of Marcus Garvey's philosophy by building it into our education system, teaching it in age-appropriate terms from the early childhood levels upwards as part of a system of education in civics which seeks to inculcate, to build in the positive values and attitudes in our people on which building a strong and cohesive society depends. We need to take this country in a new direction. The best way we can honor Marcus Garvey is to utilize his philosophy and opinions in a deliberate and strategic way through the educational system to transform negative and dysfunctional behaviors so that a new generation of young Jamaicans emerges who embrace positive values and attitudes of discipline, personal responsibility, self-belief, and self-awareness. That is the right direction to take. And the government, Madam Speaker, and the government must honor his name. And Madam Speaker, the government of Jamaica must honor his name and his memory by participating actively in the ongoing struggle for exoneration of the unfounded and unjust charges that were brought against him in the United States of America. We supported and we call on the government to support the valiant efforts by Marcus's son, Dr. Julius Garvey, and most recently by U.S. Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, who has co-sponsored legislation in Congress to exonerate his name. The government of Jamaica must get behind that. I am aware of and I support a pilot project that recently started. But let it not be like the pilot project on using Jamaican language in schools to help teach children to become fluent in English. Despite the successful results of that pilot project, it has not been embraced and developed to be part of the national system of teaching English in our primary schools. Let this pilot project on Marcus Garvey and using Marcus's philosophy in our schools become a national rollout and become part of our system of education in the country. Madam Speaker, I move on to speak about the Constitution. The opposition has had to be vigilant in standing up for the people and defending the people's constitutional rights. We have assisted 65 families who were living for decades, many decades, in the rural community of Providence or Pleasant Hill, near Loydesville in St. Catherine, on lands that were purchased for them by the Michael Manley government in the early 1970s. Last October, those 65 families were unceremoniously and without any prior discussion served notices by the government to vacate their homes. We have been assisting these families to protect their rights, to live in the homes they have built there for over many years. When our lawyers were not provided with clear and firm assurances that were requested of the government, an action was filed on their behalf in the Supreme Court. And I'm happy to say that I've been advised that an interim injunction has been granted by the Supreme Court to prevent any action being taken against those residents until the matter is finally determined by the court. Similarly, Madam Speaker, we are preparing a claim to be filed in the Supreme Court, and it's well advanced, for compensation for the vulnerable families of Clifton, near Bernard Lodge in St. Catherine, whose homes were demolished last October in what can only be described as the most cruel and inhuman acts by agents of the state. The opposition will continue to be vigilant when it comes to the hard-won rights of the people. As is well known, we have parted company with the government in its repeated and ongoing use of states of emergency as a routine policing tool in areas where there's a flare-up of violence. Our clear understanding is that the state of emergency is the Constitution's measure of last resort to protect the state from being subverted. And we know that this is the right direction because it stands up for the rights of the Jamaican people, all Jamaican people, and in particular the voiceless. In late December last year, a month in which the government twice declared states of emergency without coming to Parliament for approval, I advised the public that this was such a significant matter to the future of the country, we'll be seeking the guidance of the court on it. Well, in the public interest, an action has now been filed in the Constitutional Court, seeking a declaration that the manner in which this government has repeatedly used the states of emergency since 2017 violates the Charter of Rights and is unconstitutional. And Madam Speaker, this is the context in which when the Minister for Legal and Constitutional Affairs asked me to name 2 opposition representatives to this Constitutional Reform Committee, I sought clarity on the changes that the government is intending to pursue in relation to 2 critical elements of the Constitution: the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, and the matters in the Constitution which can only be changed by way of a referendum. Most of the important provisions in the Constitution cannot be changed without support from at least 2/3 of both houses, and in some instances, a majority vote in a referendum as well. And it is therefore imperative that the constitutional reform process proceeds as a bipartisan process. After a great deal of toing and froing with the minister, which really did not provide the clarity I was seeking, the mechanism of the Vale Royal talks, which I had been calling for ever since becoming leader of the opposition, once again proved its usefulness. At our meeting with the Prime Minister and his team on the 19th of February, we were able to have frank and open discussions on these matters. And I think we both left with a much clearer understanding of our respective positions. And I was thus able to name the opposition's 2 representatives to that committee, Senator Donna Scott Motley and Anthony Hilton, MP. We will continue to be vigilant in ensuring that no changes are made to the Constitution which would dilute, weaken, or undermine the rights of the Jamaican people. We will also maintain our position that the time has come for Jamaica to move forward to full decolonization from Britain. Full decolonization. This requires both the removal of the British monarch as our head of state, to be replaced by the president who is a Jamaican, and also the removal of the British monarch's court, the Privy Council, as Jamaica's final court of appeal, to be replaced by the Caribbean Court of Justice, a court which Jamaica, along with our fellow Caribbean countries, helped to design, helped to establish, and has helped to fully finance. The Jamaican people must no longer be denied access to justice by having a final court in a country which Jamaicans cannot travel to without a visa. We are the only country in the world whose citizens suffer that impediment, Madam Speaker. And furthermore, traveling to London to litigate involves massive costs that are way out of reach of the ordinary Jamaicans. The only Jamaicans who can access it are either wealthy Jamaicans or persons who have support from lawyers in London who have taken up their case because it's a death penalty case or something like that, pro bono, as they say. Madam Speaker, we live in an era when the people have lost faith in politicians and the institutions of governance. We have passed laws in this House and in this Parliament to put in place a robust anti-corruption framework, but there is no demonstrated political will to deliver accountability. At least 5 ministers of this JLP government and numerous politically appointed board chairmen have had to step down for various misdeeds or even corruption. It is only the reports of the Auditor General, the pressure from the opposition, and the revulsion of the wider public that forced them to step down in each of these occasions. That was the only reason why. This has to stop, Madam Speaker. Without effective accountability, misconduct continues and the public becomes more and more cynical. I pledge to the people of Jamaica that the next PNP government will be different. We will make whatever further adjustments to the anti-corruption laws and institutional framework are required to make them effective. I brought impeachment legislation to this House to hold parliamentarians to account for their serious misdeeds, a promise which the Prime Minister made when he was campaigning in the run-up to the 2016 election in his manifesto, but has not delivered. And when we form government, Madam Speaker, we will seek to pass that impeachment legislation into law so that no parliamentarian can bring the public, our name and our reputation into disrepute by their antics out the road without suffering some accountability for it. And I have told my colleagues on this side, Madam Speaker, when we form government under my leadership, don't expect leniency, don't expect accommodation when it comes to that kind of wrongdoing or any kind of wrongdoing. Expect full accountability. We will govern with integrity. We will govern with integrity. Public resources are for the benefit of the people and not for any individual's personal gain or profit. Time come for a new direction. Madam Speaker, as representatives who are called to leadership, we have to get to know and understand the people we represent. Jamaicans have a propensity to watch the ride until they have had enough. I've been on the ground in the last few weeks, and it is clear to me that Jamaicans are not willing to sit back and be taken for a ride in the wrong direction that this government is going. They want a new direction. And we are developing a raft of policies for immediate implementation following the next election when we walk into this House and sit on that side. Madam Speaker, I will share some of those with you now. The policies of the new direction to be implemented by the People's National Party government have been developed on the economic premise that the shadow spokesman on finance, a member for South East St. Andrew, described to us last Thursday. He spoke of the current realities of Jamaica's existing low-wage, low-tech economic model, with its inevitable outcomes of low productivity and low economic growth. It is a trickle-down model, but virtually nothing is trickling down. Crumbs alone. Ask the security guards and the other contract workers. Ask the minimum wage earners in the retail and wholesale trade in the towns and cities of this country. Ask the 739,600 Jamaicans, 739,600 Jamaicans living here who the most recent reports say are outside the labor force and don't even count in the unemployment statistics. They see no evidence of wealth trickling down to them. The people of Jamaica want to see a different approach to national development that enables our people, all our people, to build a good quality of life and to strive and achieve the Jamaican dream. We are ready to implement transformational policies that lead to a more competitive labor force in higher paying jobs. Policies that promote an economy that encourages research and development and the deeper use of technology to accelerate productivity and growth. A streamlined, integrated all-of-government plan with clear targets and timelines, where the left hand and the right hand know what each other are doing, and both are working together to a common purpose. I agree, Madam Speaker, I agree that job descriptions for members of the Cabinet is a good idea, but we must actually do it. Madam Speaker, first of all, our direction is decidedly new because we begin with a plan of action, and our action plan includes and integrates all portfolios in a single vision. Now is the time for the real deal. Time comes for a new direction. Jamaica must address the deep challenges that bedevil society, and those challenges must be successfully confronted and overcome, as I've said, for us to achieve our destiny of greatness. Grammy Award-winning reggae artist Kabaka Pyramid said it well. Somehow, some way, got to make things work. Long life, more pay, that's what I deserve. No time, no day, hand to mouth can't work. I got to rule my destiny. I know what my life is worth. If our country is to ascend from the social decay, behavioral dysfunction, and high levels of violent crime where we find ourselves today, we must tackle the deep structural disadvantages faced by vast numbers of historically disadvantaged Jamaicans. And in the interest of time, I'm going to share a few of the ideas that fall within that framework. There is so much to repair, Madam Speaker, in our island home. I will start by focusing on two main structural fixes that we will treat as priorities. They are land, and by extension housing, and education, and by extension skills training. We know that by addressing land distribution and ownership, we increase the confidence of Jamaicans so that they are confident and secure. So that they're confident and secure in the knowledge that they have somewhere to call their own, to house and raise their families, to grow food, trade goods and services within their communities. Similarly, we must create a society of self-aware and critical thinking, people with globally marketable skills, attitude and competence, dedicated to building Jamaica, but also trained and able to operate anywhere in the world. Everything revolves around that. Our approach to the distribution of land, Madam Speaker, in this country over many years has failed the least resourced people for centuries. Bogle and William Gordon, Paul Bogle and William Gordon were allied on land reform to transform post-emancipation Jamaica and to enfranchise the formerly enslaved. The PNP under my leadership is dedicated to transformational development of Jamaica, beginning with the belief that fairness and social justice must be at the heart of how land, especially public land, is deployed for housing, community building, and agricultural use in the development of our nation. We believe that regularizing land tenure, giving greater legal access to land to more people more efficiently, brings greater order in society, gives hope, and builds trust among people. Regularizing land tenure for us is not condoning lawlessness. It is providing a real sense of ownership and something to work for in life. It is the basis of creating intergenerational wealth and the elimination of intergenerational poverty. It is your own soil to till and your own place to build. The very psyche of a people, their sense of responsibility, dignity, and pride begin with owning a piece of the rock. Our land policy is based on regularization, not redistribution. It is grounded in equity, not exclusivity. We believe in parity, not patricians. We build up homes, communities, and spirits. We don't mash down homes. The establishment of communities across Jamaica is at the core of our land plan. Communities are vital to any nation, and where adequate infrastructure exists, then families are more resilient and communities are more cohesive and stronger. And the absence of infrastructure is an indication that something is wrong in society. Housing is a basic need for all human beings.
That's right.
Without it, living a decent life is very difficult. And mere survival is the name of the game. Too many informal settlements in Jamaica are without basic infrastructure, such as proper roads, water, sewage, drainage, street lighting, and garbage disposal services. And too many low-income communities across Jamaica have infrastructure that is old and decrepit and has long outserved its useful life and is in dire need of rehabilitation. I have seen with my own eyes, Madam Speaker, I have seen the beautiful and impressive homes that our people have built for themselves through their own tremendous resourcefulness, having got the benefit of proper infrastructure and land tenure to turn informal settlements into vibrant communities. That was the result of proactive, visionary government policy in the interests of the people under the PNP. The next PNP government will complete any outstanding infrastructure and land titling in those communities where the work was started but has not been finished for many years. We will adopt a promise. We will adopt a policy of proactively bringing infrastructure and land titling services to informal settlements with reasonable and affordable terms of cost reimbursement, backed up by support from state agencies such as the National Housing Trust and others to provide financing so that people can create immense wealth for themselves by investing in their homes. The basic development model is proven and sound and will be buttressed by robust, transparent, and accountable governance. We have also developed a far-reaching set of legislative proposals that will for the first time comprehensively tackle the intractable issues of land titling for our people. The PNP is also committed to the creation of legislation that will better enable the development of a land titling system which will be accessible and beneficial to all Jamaicans. The land titling system is too difficult in its present form, and it calls for social engineering and legislative engineering to make it accessible to the people. And To that end, the opposition suggests the following: a comprehensive review and overhaul of the existing legislation to make land ownership more affordable and accessible. We also feel that the period of ownership by possession for Crown land, which is currently 60 years, needs to be made a shorter and less oppressive period. Working alongside municipal corporations and relevant government agencies to undertake incremental infrastructure development and land titling in support of vulnerable residents where informal settlements already exist, we will bring decent living to those communities. And Madam Speaker, this relates directly to the 700,000 persons now living in informal settlements in a country of our size. All of us have to face that that is a very deep problem. And fixing these problems sustainably, equitably, transparently, not in a piecemeal fashion, but in creative and practical ways over the shortest possible time, that is what we are about. Madam Speaker, this takes us directly to educating the Jamaican people, and I turn to education. The education system needs a new direction. The Patterson report and before it, the Davies report, both speak to the systemic changes needed in the education system. We are committed to implementing the recommendations of the Patterson report. And we have 3 additional programs that we want to see put in place. Early childhood development will be the priority of the new direction for education. And this will be supported by a comprehensive policy to address the broader needs of children from birth onwards. A system of early childhood development gets all our children off to the right start. The new direction will hone in on basic schools that are struggling to survive. Many are closing under the weight of high operating costs. We'll make the investment required to raise the standards of our early childhood education system. And we will provide support so that the teachers at basic schools can earn a reasonable living. Madam Speaker, I got a message on my phone from a basic school, an early childhood teacher in St. Mary. And she said to me that her situation no bossy, as she put it. $34,000 a month is what she's earning as an early childhood teacher. $34,000 a month. How can we give our children the right start in life if we're not taking care of early childhood development and the teachers who deliver it? Time come to repair the foundation of our education system and set it in the right direction. A new direction should also focus on transforming the first 11 years of every Jamaican child's life. Jamaica must achieve the outcome that all our children are able to read, write, and do basic arithmetic by grade 4. In our primary schools, we have to support teaching by proper nutrition and deepening the use of educational technology. We have to equip our students with social skills as well. We must achieve a link between wholesome values and active citizenship. We must emphasize that. Particular attention and emphasis must be paid on the underachieving primary schools to raise standards across the board. The Patterson report reinforced the shocking statistic that between 30 and 55% of primary school leavers are not functionally literate or numerate. We have to raise standards across the board because those children going to secondary school are ill-prepared and underprepared. And they can't cope with the secondary school curriculum, and they end up leaving school with no subjects and very little by way of prospects. And is there any wonder why we have such a terrible problem with violent crime? Several of the school-based social development interventions that have been abandoned will be reevaluated, updated, and returned to schools across the island. And Madam Speaker, we will remove the taxes from laptops and tablets for students and teachers. As has been done for racehorses. Madams, at the secondary school level, we will provide the support to education that is necessary to mitigate the effects of the negative social issues that are impacting our students. Teenage pregnancy, weak family structures, substance abuse, anger management and aggression. There needs to be a program to effectively tackle those in secondary schools. And Madam Speaker, we on this side have always seen education as the antidote to poverty. Tertiary education must be accessible to those who need it most, so that they can positively transform their prospects in life. On the matter of student loans, I spoke a year ago in these words, and I think I'm going to repeat them today because the minister announced that certain things, but they don't go far enough. And I said, we will cap the student loan borrowers' loan payments at a manageable percentage of his or her income, so that the state and not the student bears the risk of the economy generating adequate employment opportunities for young people. In periods of unemployment, we will suspend loan payments and tack them onto the back end of the loan without any penalties. We will eliminate the requirement of a guarantor for a student to access a student loan across the board. Madam Speaker, these are the ideas whose time must come. We must make sure that the financing arrangements for tertiary education are not an impediment to students, especially students from low-income families, having the confidence to borrow the money to invest in their education. The structure must support that social objective. Madam, teachers must also remain top of mind. And we're at a time when, although the teachers have signed, we are told, the restructuring, and we commend them for reaching that point, it is quite clear that many of them feel extremely unhappy about the way in which the whole process has been handled. And indeed, many of them remain unhappy about the arrangements. So we need to retain our teachers more than ever going forward. And a new direction is required with creative thinking. And our spokesperson for education and training has proposed a series of benefits with that object in mind. We will ensure that teachers are eligible for student debt reductions and motor vehicle concessions at levels which increase with their years of service in the job. We will ensure that teachers benefit from an enhanced access to NHT loans and priority in allocating houses in NHT finance schemes. And we will also negotiate a package deal to provide our teachers with free internet service as a tool of their trade. These are all practical measures to support our teachers and help to induce them to stay in Jamaica and help to build our country. Madam Speaker, what has been happening in Hart in the last several years is really a disgrace. Hart will be reinvigorated and repurposed, so it provides the training opportunities needed to build a workforce that is fit for purpose for the employment opportunities of the 21st century. Stronger linkages with business and industry will be forged to ensure the relevance and cutting-edge nature of the training programs offered. The new direction will include incentives to encourage employers to establish apprenticeship and internship programs that match the needs of business and industry with the course offerings of our tertiary and our skills training institutions. We must ensure that the synergies between industry and business and training institutions are as strong as possible. Madam Speaker, I move to social transformation. Social transformation is a pivotal element of repairing the breaches in our society. And we must focus on this as a central part of our formula for development. Transforming our society goes hand in hand with education and culture. When former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson spoke of implementing a values and attitudes program, his adversaries of the day laughed him out of this chamber. But he saw what was happening to society from then, and he was right. We won't let that happen to us. Daily life in Jamaica confirms the descriptions of this country as now being a place of fear, of struggle, of suffering, with low social trust. In such a society, life is insecure and seems to be of little value. Insecurity speaks to some of the creeping things we see around us that rattle our national well-being. Yep. Our people feel insecure when Friday evening comes and it is a battle to get money from an ATM machine. Yes. And when the banks are going cashless and branches are being closed all over Jamaica. Our people feel insecure when they go to buy a little food and the card machine doesn't work. Insecurity comes from the exclusion felt by many who are told they are too this or too that when it comes to the color of their skin or how they speak, who face less pay in their areas of work because of gender disparities. And gender issues continue to bedevil our economy, with women typically earning less than men. Insecurity comes from people who are excluded from access to so many basic needs of life because they are persons with disabilities. That's it. And we passed the disabilities legislation under the last PNP government. Right. This government took 7 years to get the basic regulations in place and bring it into effect. And it needs to be ramped up and really delivered so that it is transformational for the people in this country who suffer from disabilities. And insecurities are reflected by those who struggle to keep themselves and their families alive on the mere pittance provided by PATH, by the current rates of NIS pension and poor relief, as the Shadow Finance Minister illustrated so clearly last Thursday. These problems of heightened insecurity in the nation are reflective of the intractable poverty, inequality, and alienation and exclusion. Yes. The Shadow Finance Minister told us last Thursday, and it's worth repeating, 20% of the population is estimated to live below the poverty line, and 30% of the population are deemed what some people call squatters. Though the category of poor typically emphasizes those living below the poverty line, poverty really overlaps with those who are working on minimum wage or earning close to that, because life is just not affordable at those rates of income. And the World Bank, their figures illustrate that 3/5, that's 60% of the country's wealth, is gender balance and care. To do this, we will pay great emphasis on community-based interventions that focus on anti-violence, anger management, parenting skills, and overall civility. That's right. We will substantially increase the number of social workers to take on these critical tasks. And we will revamp and expand proven and effective crime reduction programs like the Peace Management Initiative, Unite for Change, and indeed Restorative Justice. Madam Speaker, Jamaicans are living with a heightened sense of insecurity, and everybody feels compelled to sleep with their doors and windows locked tight, tight, tight. The exceptionally high crime rate has been a burden on Jamaicans for decades, and Jamaica remains one of the most violent countries in the world. Crime and violence are conditions created by the whole society, and we cannot ignore the links between inequality and crime. We must think in terms of social responsibility, which is why we favor interventions for youth at risk instead of giving up our fundamental constitutional rights. The increased militarization of law enforcement is not a strategy that we endorse. It is dangerous, and it has not proved to be effective. The ineffectiveness of the government's approach is underscored by the fact that in 2022, after 6 years of this government, there were approximately 53 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants in our nation, and Jamaica maintained the position of the highest homicide rate in Latin America and the Caribbean, one of the highest in the world. Globally, militaries defend against external threats. Why is our military being increasingly involved in policing work? 2 years ago, I observed that the size of the military, the JDF, is growing rapidly. I noted that on the trajectory that it was on, it would soon exceed the police force in a few years. Similarly, the capital budget of the military has systematically and massively outstripped that of the police force when we have a crime and violence problem in this country. That policy does not make sense. Military expenditure, spending on the JDF, more than doubled to $36 billion over the 7 years that the JLP has been in power, an increase in real terms, adjusted for inflation, of over 40% since 2017. Double the rate at which spending on the police force increased. Increased spending on the military is also attached to the continued use of states of emergency as routine crime-fighting tools. Under states of emergency, citizens can be detained without charge for indefinite periods of time. It is a threat to our democracy to use that as an ordinary policing tool. And that is why we have filed an action asking the Supreme Court to rule definitively that it is unconstitutional. Our position on crime and violence and the delivery of justice for our people remains consistent. We believe in a balanced approach, using both crime control as well as crime prevention measures. A balanced approach is essential to social harmony and crime reduction. It cannot be achieved through oppressive laws that trample on the rights of our people. We will vigorously tackle the major root causes of violent crime in a systematic way, while also properly equipping the police force and the justice system with legislation, tools, technology, and human resources to carry out their work. It is not possible to do one without also doing the other. We believe that community intervention and targeted resources are essential to achieving sustained violence reduction. It is not good enough to outsource community intervention to the private sector through Project STAR. It's not good enough. We support the private sector, we commend their efforts, but they do not have the resources to do this on a national scale. We will prioritize and invest in effective forms of social investment for crime prevention to accelerate the sustained reduction of violent crime. I've mentioned that the Peace Management Initiative, which has earned significant successes in different communities, will be revamped, revitalized, and made to work in hotspots across the country. We have seen over and over again in Jamaica how reprisals kill and maim the innocent, including our precious children. We must train and resource teams of violence interrupters on the ground in these communities to intervene early in conflicts and avert escalation into spiraling reprisals. That is a critical method for managing this situation, and the government has dropped the ball. We will train and empower 500 violence interrupters across Jamaica to help to maintain calm and good order in areas prone to high levels of violence. This must be supported also in our schools with school-wide positive behavioral interventions through the Ministry of Education. And from an enforcement perspective, what is required is spearfishing that targets dangerous criminals, the violence producers, as they're sometimes called. Not casting a wide net that snares both the good and the bad, and much more good than bad people. The government must fashion legislation that allows known vicious purveyors of criminal violence to be taken off the streets, so that an effective case for prosecuting them can be brought against them. These are people who are taking innocent lives, destroying families, and sapping the nation's collective hope for the future. The procedure that does that must have appropriate checks and balances to ensure reliable intelligence, not just sus and gossip, is the basis for their detention. Last December, I put forward detailed proposals for a court-supervised process of pre-charge detention that targets specifically persons on whom there is credible intelligence that they pose a high level of danger of violence. The procedure that I outlined is designed to allow a period of time for credible intelligence to be strengthened into prosecutable evidence. And I've suggested a 42 period for that to take place. 42 days, 42-day period, during which the court would supervise at regular intervals, after which the detained person must either be charged or released. But the initial detention has to be approved by the court. In our prison system, Madam Speaker, inadequate attention to rehabilitation and post-release employment opportunities, despite the valiant efforts of NGOs, has resulted in unacceptably high rates of persons reoffending and returning to prison. The Minister of State has said that the rate of recidivism is 40%. So, for far too many convicted criminals, the prison gates end up being a revolving door. 40% of persons end up coming back, having completed their sentences. And Madam Speaker, with all these mandatory minimum sentences, one wonders how the prison system and the court system is going to cope. We've already imposed mandatory minimum sentences for possession of prohibited weapons, which is any unlicensed firearm. And we're talking about putting very, very high mandatory minimum sentences for murder and so on. All well and good, though the deterrence is not generally accepted as being a real benefit of this. But the impact on the system, the courts, where people will no longer have an incentive to plead guilty, the backlog is going to explode, and the prison system, which is already creaking under the weight of this massive rate of recidivism of 40%, is going to become completely unworkable. The government really needs to think through this policy before it implements it. We must invest in programs so that incarceration becomes a real opportunity for rehabilitation, in addition to being punishment for transgressions. We must find ways to assist persons leaving prison to be able to earn a lawful living for themselves and their families. The whole society benefits when a former criminal turns his or her life around and becomes a constructive member of society. And we're not doing enough of that. Madam Speaker, a worrying development is this plan we've been hearing a bit about to develop a for-profit prison in Jamaica and to use taxpayers' money to facilitate it. Very little has been disclosed to the public about this plan, other than the government announcing that they've identified 300 acres of land in St. Catherine for a new purpose-built correctional facility via a public-private partnership. And from this public-private partnership, necessarily there has to be a return on investment for the private investors. That's why I say for profit, Prime Minister. In the US, they call this approach...
Point of information, Madam Speaker. The member speaking to, I'm interrupting you, please, but there is no plan or any articulation of any prison for profit, right, to be built, right? Which is what you have implied. Absolutely none. It's misleading the House. You're misleading the House. It's not been said even in jest.
Madam Speaker, I made the point that what we heard is going to happen is there's going to be a public-private partnership to build a new maximum security prison. And I went on to say that from you have a public-private partnership, necessarily the private investors are going to require a return on their investment, which is the profit of which I'm speaking. That's what I said. And
all right.
Madam Speaker, in the US, well, when you can clarify, but this is what various...
Madam Speaker, on a point of order, and I do loathe doing this in the presentation of the Leader of the Opposition. But I believe that the point that the Leader of the Opposition raised to suggest that the government is going to build a prison for profit, which are the words he uttered, is dangerous and misleading and ought to be corrected immediately. The government has never contemplated that. It has never been thought of. It is in no policy of the government. And for the Leader of the Opposition to say that without evidence, without quoting a document, it is dangerous and misleading and has to be dealt with immediately. And I urge the Leader of the Opposition, as I know he is gentleman enough, to withdraw that statement.
Madam Speaker, what we have been told is that this prison is going to be built as a public-private partnership. That's what we've been told. We have never had, it has been, the Minister of State, it has been reported and in the media. A public-private partnership. That has been stated publicly by the Minister of State who has responsibility for prisons. My point is, if it's a public-private partnership, that suggests that the private partner is going to be looking to make a return on it. That is why I said what I said. And Madam Speaker, more information and more transparency around what is intended would be welcome, because the way in which it has been brought across so far raises concerns. It's as simple as that. I will move on, Madam Speaker.
No, you won't just move on. A point of order has been made. If indeed the impression is that the government is building what were your exact words? Probably I should get that from Hanshat, because if you have said it is for profit, then it is wrong, and it is a wrong signal to send. So, Ms. Curtis, can I have what was said from Hanshat?
Thank you. Madam Speaker, this is the report that this was on December 8th, 2022.
I want to know what was said.
The government has given its clearest indication.
Remember, yes. I am speaking. I said a point of order was raised. Yes. As the Speaker, I must rule whether or not. And to do so, I need to hear from Hanshat what was said. Hansard.
Madam Speaker, I am prepared to clarify. When I said for profit, I was referring to the private-public partnership that the government has given a clear indication that it is proceeding with, or at least considering, a private-public partnership to build a state-of-the-art prison. And a private-public partnership necessarily involves the private element in that partnership earning a return on their investment. That is what I was saying. And I've said as well that if that is not the case...
Member, I am saying this afternoon that I'm waiting on what Hansard has said. A point of order... point of order has been raised.
The Prime Minister asked me to withdraw the comment about for profit. I will withdraw it.
Well, if you withdraw it,
because it is ridiculous. It would be ridiculous to hold up these proceedings while you go and refer to Hansard as to what I said. The crux of the matter is...
Member, hold a minute. Members of the House, everybody. It is clear. No, please, don't do that, member. If a point of order has been raised in this House by anybody, it is my duty to respond to it, and I could not respond. Now that the member has said he will withdraw it, we may go ahead. But it is wrong. I'm not going to do it. I can't rule on something that I'm not sure what was said. But the member has now withdrawn it, and therefore we can move ahead.
Madam Speaker, we would ask that the Prime Minister use the earliest possible opportunity to clarify the nature of this public-private partnership in relation to the building of a prison. And in particular, how the private element in that partnership will receive a return on investment, which is normally called a profit. But I am not saying that this is a for-profit prison. It's a private-public model. We want to understand how that works and whether that will protect the interests of the people of Jamaica in having a prison system that allows rehabilitation as a foremost concern to bring down this 40% rate of persons leaving prison and coming back, reoffending. That is what I'm talking about. Madam Speaker, I shall press on. I move to the issue of health. Madam Speaker, few things shake an individual's sense of security than being able to access and afford health care. As it now stands, the public health care system in Jamaica is incapable of dealing with the needs of our population as a whole. We have patients having to sleep on chairs and on benches for days sometimes while they wait to be admitted. We have the very high costs of diagnostic tests, of surgical implants, and of medication that are not, where they are not covered by the regions or the Ministry of Health or the National Health Fund, and are out of reach of most Jamaicans. And we have the congestion in hospital emergency rooms and frequent breakdowns in equipment, from basic things like elevators and air conditioning systems to critical tools like CT scans and MRI machines. In fact, even this week we were hearing about CT scans and MRI machines being out of service in public hospitals for years. Madam Speaker, it's imperative that we have a new direction in healthcare. If our hard-working healthcare workers are going to be able to treat our people effectively, the facilities at public hospitals and health centers must improve. There are 23, Madam Speaker, there are 23 public hospitals in Jamaica, and this doesn't include the University of the West Indies. And there are also 316 active health centers across the country. Still, there are many patients who cannot access adequate health care. These are mainly our elders who suffer from chronic non-communicable diseases, or NCDs, especially hypertension, which is high blood pressure, and diabetes, which are at very high levels in our population. 1 in 3 Jamaicans has hypertension, 1 in 8 suffers from diabetes, and 4 out of 10 suffer from mental illness over their lifetime, which is higher than the international average, which is 3 in 10. The rapid increase in NCDs in this country is causing a growing number of Jamaicans to suffer from renal failure, kidney disease. Many Jamaicans are...
Really, I'm going to say something now. I know there's a call when there's noise. The member says he doesn't hear the noise around. But really, members, if your leader is speaking, you constantly do that. You're encouraged.
Because one person is consistently speaking.
Madam Speaker,
But you're disturbing
Madam
your
Speaker,
leader.
I didn't realize you had a problem with your right ear.
Well, I figure if you don't hear the noise that is as close to you as that, you're not going to hear anything further away from you. I'm asking all members of the House, to allow this speaker.
Madam Speaker, please, may
I'm asking all members of this House to allow the member to speak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The rapid increase in NCDs in the country is causing a growing number of Jamaicans to suffer from kidney disease, renal failure, and many Jamaicans are unable to afford the necessary treatment, which is dialysis, renal dialysis. These are real and growing problems, and I think every member of Parliament is familiar with them. To address this adequately, the World Health Organization recommends that the spend on health should be a minimum of 5 to 6% of GDP. In Jamaica, we are at about 4.3% of GDP in our spend on health. So we are comparatively underfunded versus what is considered to be world standards. And bringing the health budget closer to 5 to 6% of GDP will be necessary to take the healthcare system in a new direction. Under the next PNP government, Madam Speaker, we would have the following priorities in our new direction. We would increase the number of renal dialysis centers with the aim initially of having one at every regional hospital in the country. A national health insurance scheme will be a priority of our next administration. When we last costed it, it was at about 22 billion a year to do. But it is essential to make the difference between treating an illness or waiting to suffer and die because of a lack of resources, which is all too often the case now. A third priority program, Madam Speaker, is the expansion of primary health care across the country. This would involve upgrading health centers, establishing mobile clinics in deep rural areas, and expanding the number of community health aides across the country, deploying them out in the communities. This is particularly needed for the treatment of NCDs and mental health patients island-wide. We need to get the community health aides actually going into the communities. And greater emphasis has to be placed on training and education and retention of healthcare professionals. For nurses, we will resume the allocation of resources for scholarships and grants to nursing students and expand the number of permanent posts in the health system for nurses. For doctors, following the completion of their internship and a senior house officer one position, we will deploy them to serve in Jamaica's rural areas. Incentives will be provided to include scholarships for postgraduate training after a period of service in our rural communities. And we will upgrade all Type B hospitals to offer more clinical specialty services to reduce the burden on the overburdened regional hospital system. Madam Speaker, I move to agriculture. Sustainable recovery also means that food security must be high on the agenda. And this entails a robust agricultural policy. We must improve farm roads, irrigation systems, and storage systems. We must encourage greater flows of capital into agro-processing. We must assist exporters to penetrate new markets and protect our valuable brands. We must incentivize productive relationships between well-capitalized mother facilities and small farmers to improve their production techniques, to transfer technology, and to generally support their development. Madam Speaker, farmers need greater protection from the ravages of the two-foot puss, the prix de larcenist. The next PNP government will significantly stiffen the penalties for large-scale prix de larceny and bring that offence under the Proceeds of Crime Act so that the profits that are made from robbing our farmers can be taken from the criminals and used to compensate those farmers. Last year, the minister told us here that he was considering issuing permits for imported chicken parts from subsidized producers overseas. And that would have unleashed unfair competition against the local industry and threatened the livelihoods of many thousands of backyard farmers. Experience has taught Jamaica the hard way that undermining local producers is not a good policy. Therefore, we spoke out against it, and happily it seems not to have been pursued. More recently, we heard about the importation of non-compliant rice by a politically connected importer, which was initially detained by the Bureau of Standards, but then hastily released onto the local market. Clearly, the protocols and procedures governing basic food imports require an overhaul and must be placed on a transparent footing to minimize the possibilities for corruption. This is a commitment from the new PNP government as we move the country in a new direction. As the Shadow Finance Minister graphically demonstrated last Thursday, food prices have dramatically increased due to the post-pandemic world inflation and will be pushed even higher as a result of the terrible drought conditions that are now impacting farmers across Jamaica. I am once again calling on the government to provide subsidies to reduce the cost to farmers for fertilizer, seeds, and animal feed for chickens and other livestock for the remaining duration of the current spike in inflation, so that consumers are spared further ravages in the spiraling price of food. This can be managed by the Ministry of Agriculture and Consumer Affairs Commission with the aid of the public to ensure that the benefit of those subsidies is passed through to consumers. Madam Speaker, the local ganja industry, and the public in general were alarmed to hear that licenses have been granted for the importation into Jamaica from Canada of commercial quantities of ganja for sale on the local market. Canada has repeatedly blocked the importation of Jamaican ganja for commercial sale, so that there is no reciprocity to justify our market being opened to Canadian ganja. The only ganja that has been exported from Jamaica has been very small quantities for research purposes, not commercial sale. And furthermore, my understanding is that there is an oversupply of ganja in the Canadian market at this time, so that these imports may very well be dumped on the Jamaican market at prices well below cost, causing further damage to a relatively young and fragile local industry. The reasons given by the Minister for such importation to be permitted are quite frankly absurd, and once again illustrate the need for strategic policy to guide the broad-based development of the local medicinal and therapeutic ganja industry. Last year, Madam Speaker, I made some specific proposals for improving the situation now faced by the local industry. When the PNP comes to office, participants in the regulated ganja industry can rest assured that we will pick up from where we left off in 2016, and we will ensure that the industry is taken in a new direction for the inclusive development of a vibrant ganja industry that is guided by principles of equity and giving a helping hand to small farmers to get involved and make money for themselves and their families. Madam Speaker, I move to the labour and labour reform issue. The current public sector compensation restructuring process and negotiations has provided all of Jamaica with an insight into the attitude of the government towards labour and industrial relations. The same is true of the government's response to the Supreme Court's ruling as to the status of security guards as employees rather than independent contractors, which I would regard as a piecemeal response. Instead of pursuing a long overdue structural reform to protect all workers in Jamaica, whether in the public or private sector, who are being denied their full rights as employees by the misuse of the legal device of contract work. The government has preferred merely to tinker with the problem by singling out a few public bodies to have their employment relations regularized. And, you know, as happy as we are for the solid waste workers and so on, this is not a wholesome approach. A structural change is needed. And in avoiding the real issue in this way, the government has missed an important opportunity and has therefore taken industrial relations backwards. Well, we intend to move it in a new direction, in keeping with this party's historical commitment to the rights of workers. Successive PNP governments have had a track record of defending workers and enacting important progressive employment legislation. Our new direction will be grounded in the 4 pillars of decent work of the International Labour Organization, the ILO, promoting jobs and enterprise, guaranteeing rights at work, extending social protection for all workers, and promoting constructive and respectful dialogue and consultation at the workplace. It is in Jamaica's long-term interest to promote an equitable and mutually beneficial relationship between investors of capital and labour. It is in Jamaica's interest to have our workers treated with dignity, to increase their commitment and their productivity in the organizations where they work. The next PNP government will pursue a series of reforms to ensure greater fairness at work, to improve industrial harmony in the country, and increase productivity and competitiveness in our economy. We will put in place a framework that examines more inclusive structures to protect freelance and independent workers in what we call the informal economy. The ILO describes these workers, and some of them are social media influencers, cultural and creative practitioners, and others. The ILO describes them as engaging in precarious work. They have no social protections, no representation, and are often categorized as unbankable and dependent on being able to use their intellectual property as collateral, and there are issues with that as well. We will consult with them and together find practical ways of empowering them through access to benefits that other workers enjoy in formal employment settings. A national labour market survey is well overdue. We need to determine the demand for jobs and the factors affecting the supply of services across different sectors of the economy. This will be a priority. We must have this national labour market survey done to inform decisions for the content and methods of training at HART and CPTC and so on. And it will also enable us to address the issues that are now being characterized as a labour and skills shortage and are being held up as justification for the importation of workers from overseas, a response which we think is not good for national development. Evidence-based and data-driven decision-making is essential to our new direction. The next PNP government will do more than talk about ending the practice of employing people for extended periods under repeated fixed-term contracts, this contract work syndrome. We will bring comprehensive legislation to eliminate abusive contractual arrangements which go around employment rights, and that is right across the economy, not just in a few public bodies. We will ensure the equal treatment of workers regardless of the legal form of their contract. Madam Speaker, the sugar industry was once Jamaica's major employer, and its demise has left a terrible vacuum in parts of Jamaica, including Westmoreland and Clarendon, where the sugar industry was once dominant. The social and economic transformation of these communities has been quite inadequate, and this has, of course, contributed to the spread of violent crime in these parishes, in what was once very peaceful communities. We will establish a commission to examine the situation faced by these communities in former sugar areas and develop a comprehensive plan for the economic revitalization of those areas. The objective is to provide new employment and entrepreneurial opportunities for displaced sugar workers, cane farmers, and their families to earn an honest living so they can live in dignity. Proper and dignified relocation arrangements must be put in place for the families of former sugar workers whose tenure on sugar lands is tenuous and who have been subjected to ad hoc and inhumane episodes of relocation by this government. I'm thinking of the many people in Innswood who have suffered from the way in which their relocations have been handled. We will encourage the establishment of joint industrial councils in industries where there are high levels of employment but no common standard for working conditions and no union representation. The security guard industry, the tourism industry, the global services industry, BPO, are cases in point. While some employers in these industries have made good strides in introducing enlightened employment practices, others are lagging behind in areas such as pension benefits, medical benefits, vacation leave, maternity leave, and so on. Joint industrial councils provide a mechanism for addressing these issues in a cohesive way, facilitating industrial harmony, while at the same time improving working conditions and equity for people working in these industries. This approach will promote the long-term sustainability of these industries and strengthen the overall economy. And Madam Speaker, we will review and revitalize the incentive legislation for employee share ownership plans, making it more user-friendly and easier to comply with and administer. This was a program of the late Michael Manley when he was Prime Minister in the second go-round and into his retirement. And we will then undertake a promotional exercise to encourage Jamaican firms to establish employee share ownership plans which align employer and employee interests so that they have common interests and create wealth for their workers at all levels, from the bearer and the janitor up to the CEO. I have seen it work, Madam Speaker. I have seen workers in firms become millionaires from employee share ownership plans, and their productivity has been enhanced because they have a stake in the returns that are made by the capital of the business. It is a progressive way of arranging our workforce arrangements, and I commend it to the private sector. But the legislation needs to be revamped and revitalized. Madam Speaker, I move to the issue of energy. The issue of energy is a serious challenge for the competitiveness of Jamaica's economy. The PNP established Wigton when the member for East Kingston and Port Royal was the minister, as Jamaica's first supplier of wind-powered energy. And the PNP established the Energy Sector Enterprise Committee, ESEC, when we were last in government, which charted the course to introduce LNG, liquid natural gas, and renewables as major sources of energy for Jamaica. This resulted in substantial investment in LNG facilities to replace old JPS capacity, and the introduction of 115 megawatts of renewables, especially solar, which are now being sold into the grid. However, since this government took over in 2016, the energy sector has been adrift without clear policy guidance or any proactive action. The Generation Procurement Entity, GPE, which is the successor to ESET, established under the Electricity Act of 2015, has not issued any requests for proposals to invite investment in power generation projects, whether renewables or fossil fuels, since this government assumed office in 2016. In July last year, the Minister of Energy prematurely terminated the work of the Joint Select Committee, which was undertaking the review of the Electricity Act 2015, leaving a vacuum in relation to energy policy going forward. And I gather he's now decided to recommence that, and we give thanks for that, because a hiatus of nearly half a year was completely unacceptable. Another failure of this government, is its non-performance in the critical areas of energy conservation and efficiency. The previous PNP government was able to secure funding from the international lending agencies to finance a very ambitious project to lower the government's carbon footprint in the use of electricity. This is the lowest hanging fruit to diminish our use of imported energy, to build climate resilience, and to save on foreign exchange. However, like so much else in that ministry, this program is at a standstill, and very little has happened since 2016. Now, there's one education institution in my constituency that had submitted a project to solarize several years ago, has not been able to make any progress with it. So I know of this firsthand. And then, Madam Speaker, this government's unprecedented expropriation of the Venezuelan company PDVSA's 49% shareholding in Petrojam, which remains an unresolved matter, together with Jamaica's unprincipled siding with other reactionary governments at the OAS against Venezuela and the Venezuelan government, rather than standing with CARICOM's principled positions, has placed Jamaica in a disadvantageous position to take advantage of the revival of the Petrocarib financing facility, while other countries in the region are beginning to benefit from that. The upshot of this is overall mismanagement of the energy sector by this government, coupled with its ill-advised foreign policy stance, is that the price of electricity to the Jamaican consumer, which was US 25 cents per kilowatt hour in 2016, is now at US 42 cents per kilowatt hour. At that very high price of electricity, Jamaican consumers continue to suffer Manufacturing and other businesses are at a competitive disadvantage versus goods produced elsewhere with lower energy costs, and more large companies are moving off the grid, seriously undermining the viability of the main energy company in the country. It is a bad situation for Jamaica. The next PNP government will build in its proven competence in this area, complete the review of the Electricity Act, finalize a modern policy based on a sound strategic framework that takes into account the goal of reducing carbon emissions and building climate resilience, and gets the procurement of diversified sources of renewables for the grid back on track. The next PNP government will also prioritize supporting Jamaicans to regularize their electricity connections and become lawful customers. Yes. NESAL was a successor to the Rural Electrification Program, a program of the 1970s. After so much of the money was robbed out under this government, it has been disbanded by the government and its remnant resources transferred to JSIF. However, the funding currently available from JSIF to support electricity regularization is a drop in the bucket. It is woefully inadequate. Many low-income communities across Jamaica where illegal electricity connections prevail are subject to frequent, prolonged power outages as JPS steps up its efforts, naturally enough, to reduce losses from theft. Families are tired of the harassment. They want to regularize, but they just cannot afford to cover the $150,000 or even more that it costs to professionally rewire their houses, to have those rewiring then inspected and certified, without which they can't enter into a contract for lawful electricity supply. Madam Speaker, regularization brings both peace of mind and the benefit of being able to prove proof of address for a variety of formal processes in everyday life. It will also reduce the prevalence of fires in those communities that all too frequently devastate the lives of residents. The next PNP government will undertake a massive exercise of support for regularization, including a subsidy to help families meet the preparatory costs of getting themselves regularized, and providing these families with solar panels to help them manage their energy costs and build climate sustainability. This would be a legitimate use of the oil hedge tax, which this government has retained even after abandoning the oil hedge insurance against high oil prices. Madam Speaker, I move to tourism. Tourism has been a mainstay of the Jamaican economy, providing significant employment for thousands of Jamaicans, housekeepers, groundsmen, and many others. Thousands of front desk clerks, bartenders, culinary and service personnel. Indeed, parts of our agriculture, transport, and manufacturing sectors depend on the viability of the robust tourism sector that provides ready markets and consistent turnover of their supply of goods and services. The introduction of the all-inclusive model and subsequent increases in all-inclusive hotel investments have made Jamaica a significant player in the world tourism market. Strong levels of investment in all-inclusives have prompted successive governments to undertake significant developments of infrastructure, including roads and water supply and housing, and is part of the reason why successive governments have boasted of continuous increases of investment in this area. However, Madam Speaker, analysts have observed a worrying trend within this robust and growing sector. Instead of seeing more opportunities emerging for local Jamaican entrepreneurs, we see increased vertical integration by large existing hotel interests. They are expanding into upstream and related businesses, such as transportation services, entertainment services, tours, and so on, taking market share from smaller locally owned businesses. This will result in more profits from the industry staying abroad and exclude local players from these sectors of the industry, which were traditionally locally owned sectors. For example, many local independent water sports operators with their glass-bottom boats and their catamarans lifeguards, and other ocean-based activities are being excluded as more and more hotels have begun to provide their own water sports operations.
Yep.
Our spokesperson on tourism recently wrote about this worrying trend, in fact, last Sunday in a local newspaper. Another issue is the employment model of the tourism industry. Approximately 60% of the workers in the industry are employed on a contract basis within a system of multiple renewals of short-term contracts. And this makes them temporary workers who are denied some of the basic employee benefits that permanent employees enjoy. And as part of the emphasis on phasing out systems of contract work, we must provide security of tenure to workers in the tourism industry. Madam Speaker, we need to have these difficult discussions. We must encourage more inclusive, community-based models of tourism delivery and employment arrangements that deliver a full range of basic benefits to our tourism workers. This analysis was included in the Master Plan for Tourism, Sustainable Tourism, which we left to guide the development of the tourism sector at the turn of the 21st century. It exists in subsequent policies, like the craft policy that we initiated. We must find ways, Madam Speaker, to make tourism and the tourism sector more inclusive,
For the people.
to increase the benefits for all Jamaicans.
For all Jamaicans.
Yeah.
All Jamaicans. Not just a few.
Jamaica's tourism needs to be refocused on building an industry that is beneficial to the small and medium-sized Jamaican business owner. It must contribute more meaningfully to the growth and wealth creation for more Jamaicans through the major linkage industries. There are 7 of them: manufacturing, agriculture, sports and entertainment, health and wellness, shopping, and gastronomy, which is food services. In keeping with the new direction, the Labour and Tourism Ministries will develop together a comprehensive labour policy to address the issues of contract employment, housing, and other concerns affecting tourism workers.
That's right.
We will move towards diversification through solidifying a European plan, EP development strategy and policy to incentivize investors above and beyond the current provisions. This would prioritize European plan investments in prescribed areas to drive economic activities for the benefit of restaurants, shopping, transportation, etc., leading to a more inclusive product. We will review the permitting of vertically integrated operations, water sports, transportation, gift shops, among many other attendant services, to determine to what extent and on what conditions these should be allowed. And we will work with the industry to ensure that more Jamaican singers, dancers, musicians, and other entertainment professionals can benefit from more opportunities in the tourism sector. The time for a new direction in tourism and a new way of thinking in general about how we move to the next phase of accelerating and equitable growth in the economy is now. Madam Speaker, I turn to another area that is near and dear to me, the cultural and creative industries. I want to talk a little bit about this because administration after administration has paid lip service to the sector. We often speak glowingly about the benefit it brings, but there is no credible, sustainable plan of action to really develop the sector and take it in a new direction. We have a new direction plan for the cultural and creative industries. When I was studying law in my 20s, one of my first areas of interest was the music business. I started a record label called Riverside Music, produced 3 albums, and my love for the law and for music converged. So this area is an area of importance to me. And when I was Justice Minister, we strengthened legislation to protect Jamaican cultural and creative practitioners. We amended the Copyright Act to extend the period of copyright substantially, because some of Jamaica's most important and most loved recordings from the early 60s and 70s were about to lose their copyright protection, and we extended copyright for them. We also passed the Security Interest in Personal Property Act, providing a legal framework to allow Jamaican creators to leverage intellectual property as collateral for financing. This means that an artist can under Jamaican law, use their music, art, or other intellectual property, whether it be books, films, television and radio programs, film scripts, choreography, beats, animation, designs, etc., as collateral in any financial institution that will take it. Unfortunately, since then, the follow-up work has not been done with the financial sector and the regulators of the financial sector to ensure that this becomes reality. Getting that law to work as intended requires another coordinated step, ensuring that the cultural and creative sector and the financial sector are in lockstep. This requires sensitization all round. Creative practitioners need to deepen their financial literacy, and financiers need to embrace creative and digital literacy to acquaint themselves with the models and processes that exist both in other economies where these industries support each other, and right here at home where we have developed some unique homegrown cultural and creative business processes of our own. I raise this matter of convergence and integration, Madam Speaker, because it is at the center of understanding how to develop an emerging cultural and creative sector. There are two levels of work that need to be happening simultaneously to develop our cultural and creative economy in Jamaica. The first is to provide an enabling environment to help creatives to thrive. The second is doing the technical work required to support the cultural and creative economy, locally and internationally. These are the primary roles of government in the development of the cultural and creative sector. Our first strategy is to support and facilitate thousands of individuals who the Shadow Finance Minister spoke about last Thursday, who work in the 20 or more operational subsectors in Jamaica's cultural and creative industries. Many of them are young people. They include the sound system selector, the round-robin promoter, the youth who list the sound box off the truck and back on when it's finished, the one who rolls up the cables, the cameraman, the engineer, the lighting designer, makeup artist, and many more. It also includes the movie director, production manager, event executive, the digital communication specialist, and the publicist. And in the sports arena, it includes athletes and trainers and management teams. The cultural and creative sector is therefore a vast area that provides many categories of jobs, and thousands of Jamaicans work in the sector across many different income brackets. However, a 2021 mapping study on the Jamaican cultural and creative economy tells us that most of Jamaica's cultural and creative workers are among the working poor. As I said earlier, their jobs are considered precarious. Most are independent, contract, or freelance workers. The difference with cultural and creative workers, however, is that they are hit with a double whammy. Not only are they mostly independent contractors, but they operate within a largely informal economic ecosystem. And this must be an area of focus for the development of the sector. So how do we do this? We have identified 12 areas of common need by creatives across the cultural and creative sector, things they can all benefit from. And we call this the enabling environment. We have a specific plan to develop this enabling environment to help directly the cultural and creative industries to thrive. We know that there are certain things that all cultural and creative practitioners need to thrive. Many need to be included in the formal banking and financial services system, i.e. financial inclusion. Others need to find new markets. Our artists and artisans depend on Christmas time to set up tables at fairs across the country to sell products. For many, that is the extent of their market. We want to assist them to find ways to access global markets. Some need training. Others need various forms of facilitation. And incentives, too, must be a part of the structuring of this sector for growth. A 2022 study tells us that the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport is the main portfolio holder for the cultural and creative industries. Yet the Ministry of Industry will implement the recently announced Film Fund through the Film Commissioner, JAMPRO. That ministry is also doing the economic impact research through the Jamaican Development Corporation, Business Development Corporation, thank you. Animation is housed at Jamaica House, so is information, which is responsible for communication infrastructure, policy and legislation, which is also part of the cultural and creative industries. The digital agenda falls under the Ministry of Energy, Science and Technology. The Ministry of Tourism is implementing the training plan for the cultural and creative sector, while the Ministry of Education is responsible for the region's only art college, the Edna Manley College of the Visual and Performing Arts. Madam Speaker, the left and the right hands are not clapping. There's no holistic, sustainable plan, while the subsectors of the industry have been clamoring for one. Governments around the world are being encouraged to plan their cultural economies. CARICOM has called on countries of the region to make national plans for the cultural sectors. Belize and Barbados are way ahead. St. Kitts and Nevis and Grenada have picked up the pace with dedicated ministries. Meanwhile, Jamaica seems satisfied to allow its cultural and creative economy to exist in its fragmented state, working in silos. The United Nations Conference of Trade and Development, UNCTAD, has listed countries of the world with national strategies or national plans in this area. Jamaica, a cultural and creative powerhouse, is not on the global list of countries serious about cultural and creative production. That speaks volumes, Madam Speaker. Our second strategy is therefore to coordinate all the technical work that needs to be done across ministries to streamline the cultural and creative economy. This is necessary to create a structure of the sector and include it in our national economy and accounts, alongside other sectors like tourism and mining, energy, and so on. This requires a policy and a clear plan where none currently exists. Our ministries, departments, and agencies must add value to the cultural and creative sector by doing those things that only governments can do: policy, legislation, and programmatic implementation. Put in place the systems to record statistics for sound policy decision-making, and the pursuit of transparent and efficient and inclusive programs that enable, empower, and support this dynamic and growing sector, and building out meaningful legislation in fulfillment of a national plan. We know what we're doing in this regard, Madam Speaker, and we are ready to take the cultural and creative industries in a new direction. Time come. Madam Speaker, we spent our last time in government putting the public finances of the country on a sustainable footing. That has enabled the revenue growth that has brought the public debt down from the very perilous 140% of GDP, where we took it and inherited it in 2012-13, to just 80% where it is today, creating the fiscal space where there are expanding options in public policy as to how to approach national development. The Jamaican people need not worry. When the time is right, our full plan will be revealed as to the positive new direction in which we will take Jamaica when the PNP forms the next government. I close this afternoon with a warning. If we continue on the path that Jamaica has been taken by this JLP government, we will continue to see the entrenchment of power and the reach of the already rich, the enrichment of those who are politically connected, and a deepening of the dependency of the working poor and the most vulnerable on the inadequate handouts of the state, all in the name of a distorted and disfigured caricature of prosperity. Every leader has their own unique style. My response to cases of injustice is not to get riled up and make a whole heap of noise or threats, manipulation and intimidation. That's not my style. My fury and disappointment in the direction of this government takes me to a place of reason, deep contemplation, effective strategy, and a commitment to work harder to deliver tangible results. It leads me to work out ways to make things better. And this is what accounts for my professional history. It is what accounts for my recognized success as a top commercial lawyer. It is what accounts for my proven prowess in business. It is what accounts for my effective results as a legislator in this House and in the Senate. It is what I bring to this struggle on behalf of the Jamaican people for a better quality of life for all. Empty hype and bluster, those are not my style. Yet every Jamaican must know I have your back. And no matter how many trips around this country it takes for me to meet the people of Jamaica, for you to learn about me and who I am, and understand that I stand for you and with you, for me and our team to engage with you, we will do what it takes. I want you to ask me questions. I want you to ask me questions. I want you to tell me when you don't agree with me. And tell us the things you want us to do for you. Yes. I want to meet your parents and meet your children. Yes. We want to know the things that concern you. Yes. Because that is how we can plan on your behalf. And when we move in the new direction, we must do it together. Time comes.
Time come. No more badmanism. No more power arrogance. Power drunkenness.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of the debate until I have indicated to you the motion for adjournment, what the continuation plans for this Honourable House will be. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Members, the question before the House is that there is a suspension of the debate. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. House Leader, the debate is suspended.
Madam Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today. I therefore move that the House be adjourned until Thursday, March 16 at 2 p.m., when the Speaker will be the Most Honourable Andrew Holney, Prime Minister of Jamaica. Well done. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Members, the question before the House is that we do adjourn until Thursday at 2 p.m. when the Speaker will be the Honourable Prime Minister. Those in favour?
No, I was giving him back.
Those against? The ayes have it. This House is now adjourned.